When your viral portrait matches someone missing and that someone is your ex-boyfriend, you realize that art doesn't lie. I came to New Orleans chasing colors I'd only seen in dreams and on a few worn-out art textbooks. My name, Maya, and I lived for the murmur of jazz in the street corners and the spray-painted walls telling stories of their own. I found a little spot near the French Quarter, set up my sketch pad each morning, and began to draw the faces of people who passed by. It wasn't always easy. Some walked fast, others barely glanced my way. But I loved the challenge of catching something true in a few pencil strokes. The curve of a laugh, the tilt of a hat, the way someone's eyes looked into something far away. One morning I noticed a man walking slowly, his head down, coat pulled tight in the autumn breeze. The light hit his face just right, and I thought, I might try him. I asked if I could sketch him. He nodded quietly. His silence was not unfriendly, just heavy with something unspoken. I drew him for about 15 minutes, careful to trace the lines around his eyes, to capture the slight crease at his brow, the way his lips dipped just a fraction. When I finished, he looked at the page for a moment and then back at me, and I said thanks. He nodded again and disappeared into the crowd. That drawing stayed with me more than usual. For days I carried the printed scan of it on my phone, mostly because I liked how it had turned out. Then I posted it to my art page on Instagram, #_ street portrait and # New Orleans. And within 24 hours, someone messaged me saying, that's X. The irony hit me hard. I replied asking, who's X? And they sent a link, a missing persons page. Suddenly, my harmless sketch of a stranger was connected to a man reported missing 2 years ago. Every nerve in me turned electric. I remembered the man's face, not fully. But when I looked back at my drawing, I thought, could it be? My heart pounded because 2 years ago I'd loved someone who simply vanished. No note, no call, just silence. I told myself it couldn't be him, but the resemblance was too exact. I looked at the date, I looked at my memory of the night he disappeared from my life, and I wondered, what if the stranger I sketched was not so much a stranger after all? Engagement question. If you saw a sketch of someone missing and you thought you might know them, would you reach out or stay silent? The news message kept buzzing in my mind. I hardly slept. I kept flipping through old photos of my life before he vanished. His name was Lucas. I still remember how his voice sounded when he whispered my name on that last night we met at a rooftop bar overlooking the Mississippi. We laughed about nothing, and then suddenly he said he needed to step away for a while. I didn't argue. I trusted him. Hours passed. The next morning he was gone. Phone silent. Apartment empty. I never knew whether he left me or simply walked away from his life. The silence swallowed me. Now I was in New Orleans, making art and pretending the past was behind me. But when this message arrived, I realized the past might never truly be behind. I couldn't stop thinking about the sketch, the missing persons page, the haunting feel of recognition. So I reached out to the account that messaged me. We exchanged a few terse messages. They thought my sketch matched the missing man's image shown on the site. They asked if I could visit the address where he was last seen. My hands shook. I typed, I'll try. That evening, I went back to the little spot near the street corner and looked at my sketch again in the fading daylight. I asked myself, was I seeing what I wanted to see? Was I projecting memory onto someone else? Art can lie when the heart wants it to, but this felt different. I could almost remember the warmth of his coat, his eyes flickering like the streetlights. So I made a decision. I would pursue this. Not for fame, not for recognition, but for closure. For truth. The next day, I walked to the address given in his missing persons case. A block of old buildings, paint peeling, balconies sagging. I showed the sketch to a neighbor, a woman with tired eyes and a gentle smile. She looked closely. He passed here often, she said quietly, but I haven't seen him in over a year. My heart dropped. It felt like a door closing, but I knocked again. I told her I drew him recently. She paused. Do you know him? She asked. I swallowed. I said no, but I knew it might be yes. Would you face the past by visiting the last known place of someone you lost, or would you stay distant? Walking away from that building, I felt the weight of the city on my shoulders. The streetlights flickered, and every shadow seemed to carry a memory. I returned to my studio space, small and cluttered with pencils and charcoal and half-finished sketches of people whose stories I would likely never know. I decided to turn the viral drawing into a full portrait, larger than usual, sharper, and more detailed. I wanted to give this man dignity in my art. I wanted to understand the face. As I sketched, I kept thinking of Lucas and the night he disappeared. I remembered his laugh, his voice, the way he looked at me like I was the only one in the room. I remembered the worry in his eyes when he said he needed to leave for a while. He promised he'd return by morning. He never did. I never got a note. I never got a reason. I'd spent years asking myself what I did wrong. Now here I was drawing someone else's face, and yet it felt like I was drawing him. By the time I finished the portrait the next morning, the image had been shared thousands of times online. Comments spilled in. Who is this man? Why is this sketch so perfect? He looks like he has a story. Amid that, I received a direct message. I know him. My heart lurched. I opened the message. It said a neighbor recognized him. He had been seen walking late at night in the French Quarter. They offered a clue. He used to stay at a small guest house near Rampart Street. I thanked them and asked for the address. They hesitated. Be careful, they wrote. Some people don't want to be found. I stared at the screen, my own heart beating like a drum in a parade. I thought, maybe I should stop this. Maybe art should stay safe and pretty. But something inside me wouldn't let go. I felt drawn to this face, as if the canvas was a portal into a past I thought I buried. I packed my sketch pad and headed out again into the streets, camera in one hand, portrait print in the other. I did not know what awaited me at the guest house, but I knew I had to try. Have you ever felt that a stranger's face looked exactly like someone you knew? What did you do? The guest house on Rampart Street was older than I expected. Its paint faded and front porch sagged under age. I stood outside, clutching my portrait, heart pounding. I asked at the reception if anyone matching the face stayed there. The woman behind the desk paused. She glanced at the portrait. Yes, she said finally. He checked in under a different name 2 years ago, stayed a month, then disappeared. My breath caught. Do you have his room number? I asked. She shook her head. I'm sorry, records purged. He left no forwarding address. I walked up the stairs to the second floor. The corridor smelled of old wood and stale air. I stopped at room 214. Just a hunch, but something pulled me there. I knocked gently. No answer. I slipped the portrait under the door and left. Outside, I sank onto the stairs. I closed my eyes and remembered Lucas again. The way he touched my hand, the way he looked at me when he said, "I'll be back." All the promises now ghosts. As I sat, someone came down the stairs. A tall man wearing an old cap, eyes hidden under the brim. He looked at me. I showed him the portrait. "Do you know this man?" I asked softly. His jaw tightened. He stared at the image. Then he looked up at me. He said, "Yes. He stayed here." We didn't know his name. My pulse surged. "Can you tell me where he went?" I asked. He shrugged. "No idea. He just left one night." I exhaled. The shock of it bit. I said thanks and started to leave. But the man spoke again. "If you're drawing strangers," he said, "make sure you are ready for what you find." I nearly laughed at how appropriate that line felt. I left the guest house and wandered the streets, the night thick around me, the jazz clubs playing somewhere behind shutters, the lamplight pooling on cobblestones. I kept the portrait in my bag, pressed against my heart. I thought, what if I find him? What if I don't? And why do I care so much? I'm just a girl who draws strangers. Would you confront someone when you realize a stranger you sketched is connected to your past, even if it unsettled you? The next days, I lost myself in work. I set up in a different part of the city, along Magazine Street, hoping to draw fresh faces and distract myself from the portrait case that refused to stop whispering. But the moment I sketched, memories flooded in. Lucas's voice, the empty apartment, the unanswered texts. I realized I was drawing him again, even when I wasn't meaning to. My art betrayed me. The lines on the page felt like they were mapping the unknown. Then a message popped up on my art page. A woman sent me a screenshot, a news article about the missing man's case. The image matched my sketch almost exactly. The article said the man's name was Marcus Dalton, reported missing from New Orleans 2 years ago. The case went cold. I stared at the article, at its photo of a man with the same eyes I drew, and my past screamed inside me. I remembered Lucas's full name, Lucas Dalton. Same last name. My throat tightened. Could it be a coincidence? I knew one thing. I needed clarity. I texted my friend Jenna back home. She's an investigative reporter and always told me I'd make art that told stories. I sent her the article, the sketch, and confessed. The missing man might be the ex I never found. She replied with, "Get his records. Talk to the police. But keep safe. The word felt strange. I hadn't felt safe the night Lucas left. And now I didn't feel safe drawing strangers who might be more than strangers. That evening, I went back to the little studio and stared at the big portrait I made of Marcus/Lucas. The city's lights came through the window. I thought of the man behind those eyes. I thought of our time together. I thought of his whisper that night, his promise. I thought of the emptiness that followed. I asked myself, was I still in love with a ghost? Or was I falling for the truth I hadn't faced? I picked up my pencil and started adding shading under the eyes. I made the scar above his brow deeper. I made color in his lips more vivid. I painted him to be alive on the page. If you discovered someone from your past shares a last name with a missing person you just drew, would you dig deeper or walk away? When I left the studio, it was past midnight. The street lamps were dim and the nightlife had quieted into a low hum. I felt drawn to the riverfront. I walked along the Mississippi, the water shimmering under moonlight. My mind circled the portrait and the article and Lucas. I closed my eyes and listened to the water, hoping for answers to float in. But the river offered silence. Suddenly my phone buzzed. A message. "Meet me at the bridge by Bourbon Street." I have something. It was Jenna. My heart hammered. I replied yes and found myself crossing the bridge. There she was, leaning on the railing, her face lit by the city glow. She handed me a USB drive. "I pulled police logs," she said. "There's a case. Dalton, Lucas Marcus, missing 2 years ago. He listed a New Orleans address. He had a sketchbook. It matches yours." I took the drive, fingers trembling. Back in the studio, I plugged it in. The files opened. Photos of Lucas Dalton, his last known address, a guest house log under the name Marcus Dalton. The dates matched the portrait stay. I stared at his face on screen. The same tilt of chin, the same uneasy smile. Then I saw something I didn't expect. A photo of Lucas leaving the city late night, boarded a bus headed out of state. My throat constricted. He didn't vanish in New Orleans. He left. I felt relief and terror at once. Relief because I knew what happened. Terror because I didn't know why. I called Jenna. "Why did he leave?" Her voice softened. "We don't know. But people who leave like that often feel they have to run from something." My mind flicked back to nights he seemed distant. Nights he'd stare out the window and not speak. For 2 years, I assumed he ghosted me. Now I wondered, did he try to save himself? Or did he run because he couldn't stay? I sank into the chair and reached for the portrait on the desk. I stared at his eyes. The ones I drew. The ones I felt. The ones I feared I might be fooling myself with. Would you dig into someone's missing person case if you realized you had a personal connection, even if it felt scary? The next morning, I visited the guest house again. This time, I brought the USB drive, the photos, the sketch. The front desk receptionist recognized me. She led me to an old ledger hidden in a dusty filing cabinet. There it was. Dalton, Marcus, stayed 30 days, room paid in cash, left a note, gone to find answers. Nothing more. My heart lodged in my throat. I asked, "Do you know his next move?" The woman shook her head. "He walked away. That's all." Walking back, I crashed into my memory of Lucas. The night he slipped out of the apartment without saying goodbye. The look in his eyes when he said there was something he had to deal with. I remembered sliding into bed alone and expecting a text the next morning. It never came. For 2 years, I carried a silent question in my blood. Now I had 2 years of mystery plus this new clue. I asked myself, was he afraid of me? Was he afraid of something else? I decided to follow the bus records. Jenna mapped it. His last ticket purchased was to a town 3 hours away. I booked my ticket. I told myself, this is art, this is closure, this is me drawing the missing lines in his story. I didn't tell many people. I kept the sketch secret. I boarded the bus, portrait photo in my bag. I traced the route Lucas took. On the right, I stared out the window at the changing landscape and thought of all the faces I'd drawn, each one a stranger, each one a possibility. But this wasn't a stranger. This was someone who mattered. When I arrived in that town, I found the bus station ledger. I found the man, Marcus/Lucas, checked into a small motel under yet another alias. I asked the clerk, "Do you know where he went next?" They handed me a note. "Left for New York." My heart hammered. I folded the note. I whispered to the portrait, "So you left." I walked out of the station and looked up at the sky. I told myself, don't romanticize what you don't know. But I realized I already had. Would you travel across the country chasing a sketch if you believed it held the key to your past? Back in New Orleans, I felt changed. The streets looked different. The colors felt richer and the shadows deeper. I set up my easel again, near the same spot where I first drew him. I stared at the crowd and wondered, which face would match a missing person tomorrow? Which stranger hides a secret I don't see? I picked up my pencil and drew, but the lines felt heavier. The strangers felt heavier. Because I realized every face carries a story, and some stories I might be part of. One evening, I received a call from the local PD. They had reopened the Dalton case. They asked me to come in and look at photos. I showed them my portrait, and they compared it with the missing man's file. They asked prepared questions. How well did I know the subject? And I said, not at all. And yet everything about him felt intimately familiar. I left the station blinking into the daylight, clutching copies of the file. I thought of Lucas and the man I drew and the gap between them. I thought, maybe the person I loved and the person I sketched are the same. Maybe I never lost him. Maybe I just found him in art. That night, I found myself looking at old messages I saved from Lucas. I read the last text he sent. "I'll be back by morning." I read the next message I never got. I sat on the balcony of my studio, the city humming below, and I felt both sadness and relief. The sadness for all the nights I spent wondering, the relief for the moment when truth felt close. I flipped open my sketchbook and looked at the sketch and the full-size portrait hanging on the wall. I touched the lines. I whispered, "Thank you for posing. If art helps you uncover a person you thought you lost, do you keep drawing or do you close the sketchbook and walk away?" The next morning, I walked to the river again. The water was still, smoky dawn mist dancing across the surface. I held the portrait. I asked quietly, "Are you here?" I didn't expect an answer, but I felt something shift. My phone buzzed. It was a text from an unknown number. "I saw your drawing. Meet me tomorrow at 8 p.m. by the old jazz club on Decatur Street." My fingers froze. My mind raced. Was this him? Was someone else playing a trick? I replied yes. And then I waited. That evening, I walked to the club. The neon sign flickered. Fleur de Lis Jazz. I stood outside, my heart pounding louder than any trumpet inside. At exactly 8 p.m., a man stepped out of the shadows. His face. I recognized that tilt of chin, the crease on the brow. I held up the portrait. He looked at it and then at me. He said, "You drew me." My voice shook. "Yes?" He paused. "I didn't want to be found." I swallowed. "Why?" He looked at the river behind us. "I had to leave the life I had. I still love you, Maya. But I couldn't stay everything I ever feared and hoped collided in that one sentence." I stepped closer but held the portrait between us. "Why now?" I asked. He looked away. "Because your art brought me back." I felt tears burning. We talked for hours under the lamplight. He told me why he left. Fear of failure, fear of drowning in someone else's expectations. He said he saw the sketch on social media, recognized himself in it, and realized he couldn't hide anymore. I listened to his voice, the one I once knew so well, the one I thought I'd lost forever. I realized how much I'd missed him, and how much I missed believing in him. He reached for my hand. I let him. I whispered, "You don't have to run anymore." The city around us pulsed with life. The streets, the music, the art, they all seemed to nod in agreement. If someone you once loved shows up because of your art, would you forgive them or walk away? In the weeks that followed, life in New Orleans began to move with a gentler rhythm. The city felt lighter somehow, as if the music, the noise, and the laughter had softened around the edges. I found myself sketching again in the same spot near the French Quarter, but this time I wasn't alone. Lucas sat beside me, quietly tracing lines in his own little notebook, his presence calm and steady like the heartbeat of the city itself. He didn't talk much while I drew, and I didn't need him to. Sometimes silence can heal what words once broke. We spent days exploring the streets that had unknowingly connected us again. He showed me places he had stayed after he disappeared, narrow alleys, rundown apartments, forgotten corners where he tried to rebuild himself. He spoke in fragments, but I learned to read between his pauses. He hadn't run away from love, he had run from fear. Fear of becoming a failure. Fear of being seen as less than the man he wanted to be. And somehow, my art had found him before I did. That truth still left me breathless. When he finally said he wanted to see my work in a gallery, I hesitated. But something inside me whispered that closure isn't about endings. It's about showing the world what you survived. So we prepared together. I enlarged the original sketch that started it all, layered it with color, and added a faint outline of the city skyline behind him, the New Orleans that brought us back together. The day of the exhibit, the gallery buzzed with voices. People crowded around the canvas, pointing, whispering, recognizing the viral image that once swept through their feeds. I stood before them, my hands trembling, but my voice steady. "This," I said, "is the face I thought I lost. This is the face that found me again." There was a quiet murmur, followed by applause that echoed softly against the walls. Lucas stood at the edge of the crowd, smiling, his eyes glistening with something that looked like peace. For the first time in 2 years, I felt whole. After the crowd faded, he came to stand beside me. "You drew me back to life," he said quietly. I smiled and told him, "You were never gone. You were just waiting to be seen again." We walked out of the gallery hand in hand, the city lights reflecting on the wet cobblestones, the air thick with the scent of jazz and rain. That night, I opened a new sketchbook. The first page remained blank for a long while before I finally wrote one line across it. Art doesn't just capture strangers. It reminds us who we were before we forgot ourselves. Then I smiled, closed the book, and whispered to the city, "Thank you for bringing him home." If your art had the power to bring someone back into your life, would you open that sketchbook or leave it closed forever?